Hi, I'm Dr. Chuck Betters. Welcome to Ask Dr. Betters. And one of the things that is extremely difficult for me in this position to address questions that you're asking is there are times when your questions don't have clear, direct biblical answers. And this is one of them. Listen closely to this question. My husband and I are trying to get pregnant and have been reading a lot of information about all those gene testing options available to us in preparation. We have been believers our whole lives and do not believe in abortion. But what about if you opt to have these special gene tests done and they come back with negative results, meaning there is a significant birth defect? Would abortion be an option? Is abortion ever okay? Please help. We don't know how to navigate these tough decisions ahead of us should we receive bad results like this. Well, there are a couple of clear teachings in Scripture that maybe can form the backdrop for answering this question. Number one, all life comes from God. We know that from Scripture that God is the author of life. He is the Alpha, the Omega, which means He is the first and He is the last when it comes to defining life. Secondly, God does not view human beings as having, quote, birth defects, as though that makes us different or less human or less desirable. In fact, He actually tells us in Exodus 4:11, He says, well, who makes the blind blind and who makes the deaf deaf? Is it not I, the Lord? So as far as God is concerned, He knows from the beginning, even before the child is born, who is going to be born with what we would call a birth defect and who is not. Where it becomes a little vague is science as we know it today and technology as we know it today has changed the discussion points significantly, because now we are able to learn things, we are able to understand things prenatally, pre-birth, that years ago we never could have possibly dreamed of knowing. Gene testing is one of those things. To be able to test a baby in utero, to discern whether or not that child is going to be born with a defect, and thus, as far as the world is concerned, a candidate for an abortion. These raise tough questions. Questions like, well, what about people who can't have children? Is it ever right to practice fertilization that we would call the test tube babies, to be able to fertilize an egg to become an embryo and then freeze it? Well, the Scripture doesn't address any of that. It doesn't even acknowledge that that kind of technology exists. So we have to go back to the basics of what the Bible does tell us. All life belongs to God, and when it comes to birth defects, God knows that that person is just as valuable and just as needing to be loved as anybody else is. Now, having said all of that, I think that as Christians, we need to keep an open mind that each case is different. Each situation is different. For example, there is gene testing that can be done before any kind of fertilization takes place. There's gene testing of the mother and the father to discern whether or not it is in the best interest of everyone, maybe to consider adoption rather than to conceive a child that could possibly have a very painful disease. But once that child is conceived, once that child is in utero, and once that child is reproducing cells and becoming more and more of an image of a human being and a child created in the image and likeness of God, there's a lot that can be done before that all takes place to address individual situations. Having said all of that, what I want to convey is that there's no one single rubber stamp or cookie cutter mold that we can place that covers all of these situations. That's why I would encourage a couple, first of all, to be strongly pro-life and to value the principles of life, to value the principle that that child is still a child, even though he or she may have a birth defect, but to discuss it with those who also have an understanding of the pro-life principles before you make any decisions that you'll regret. The question is asked about abortion. Once that child is conceived in the womb, once that child begins to form, abortion should never, ever be an option. You should not look at what could be and what is possible as a basis for making a decision to abort a child. Once that child is in the womb, the decision has already been made. Some might say, well, I don't want my child to have a painful death. Well, what do you think abortion is? Abortion is a painful death. And so you need to trust at that point that God has given you that remarkable baby, that miraculous baby for a reason. And that reason may be to raise that child to know, love, and fear God, even though he or she faces some dire medical consequences. Pro-life principles work, but they're not all, like I said, cookie-cutter principles. You have to apply wisdom and seek wisdom. Seek wisdom from those who in the medical community love the Lord and love the pro-life principles, in the pastoral community, in the church community, because in the multitude of counselors, there is safety and there is wisdom. I hope this helps.